Joining us now is our friend, the former ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton. Mr. Ambassador, welcome as always, sir.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me. Glad to be with you.
Well, thank you. All right, let's talk about this notion of closing Guantanamo Bay, something that, from day one, the president has, even before he was elected, he promised to do that very early on in her first term. Never got the chance to do it because of Congress and other issues. Releasing almost half or so of the prisoners that are there to other countries like Yemen. What's wrong with that picture? What's wrong with that scenario?
Well, several things. First, I think it shows that in 4.5 years, the president has learned absolutely nothing about the threat of international terrorism. It was a mistake in the 2008 campaign to say he wanted to close Guantanamo Bay. It's a mistake to say that by doing so we will eliminate an al-Qaeda recruiting point. Look, the Gitmo is an excuse for al-Qaeda. It's not the reason. If Gitmo did close, they'd find another recruiting tool. The facility was set up because there was no place else to put those people, and that remains true today. The notion that you let them go simply means that at least a third will return to the battlefield against us, and probably much more than that. We say a third of those released have been recidivist, but those are the ones we know about. Many of these released prisoners, we have no idea where they are, and quite likely they're back waging terrorism against us. And finally, the idea that Yemen is a place you can send terrorists just boggles the mind. The government is in a state of near collapse. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is all over the country. You've got Iran operating with tribes that are friendly to it, trying to destabilize friendly regimes on the peninsula. This is a tribute to the administration's ideology and to its continued willful blindness to the threat of international terrorism.
Right, and I am led to believe from reports that I've heard throughout the course of the last few days, especially in anticipation of this speech, that the prisoners who remain there are some of the worst of the worst. If the recidivism rate is about 30 or 29%, like you said, that we know of for the ones that we've released, there appears to be a much greater chance that some of these hardcore, worse, if you will, terrorists might even, turn around at a higher rate.
No, almost certainly. In the administration's first year, it really did embark on a very vigorous campaign to try and release as many people as it could. And the ones that did get out were the least objectionable. And I think many governments said, we don't want those people back. This is part of the hypocrisy of international diplomacy. We are criticized for Gitmo by some of the same countries that say, we're not taking those people back.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now let's talk about this notion that the war on terror is not going to be a permanent thing, that it's not a perpetual war, that one day al-Qaeda will be done away with. It might be 10, 20 years. We're not ready. We're not there yet. But this notion, this philosophy, I mean, look, we saw the beheading in London yesterday, which I do want to ask you about as well, and we saw the bombings in Boston, and we know what's going on. But this notion that if we, and it's always been this way with President Obama, it's al-Qaeda, and if we get rid of al-Qaeda, then the problem of terrorism goes away, completely ignoring the religious philosophy that accounts for, the lone wolves, the people who swear allegiance, the people who think they're going to paradise, all of that.
Yeah, no, it's a question of defining the problem into insignificance and then declaring that the problem is over, and that's been going on for quite some time, and continues even though the September 11 attack and murder of 4 Americans at Benghazi, along with the Boston Marathon bombing, along with the attack in London, all showed that it's contrary to fact. But the fundamental problem, the root cause of the administration's policy here is the notion that terrorism is simply a violation of criminal law. It's like a bank robbery, or maybe a little bit worse, but it's basically something that our domestic criminal law system can handle, and they do not view it as a war on terrorism, or more appropriately put, the terrorist war against us. That's the philosophy, the law enforcement philosophy we followed in the 1990s with the first bombing of the World Trade Center, the attack on Khobar Towers, the attacks on our embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, the attack on the USS Cole in Yemen, and many other instances, and that brought us to the first 9/11 because the terrorists and their supporters could see we weren't really serious about defending ourselves. And I think it ties in with reports leaked conveniently by the administration that actually
you didn't say leak, did you? We might have to criminally investigate another reporter or something.
Right. Well, that's only leaks that are detrimental to the administration's image. This leak showed that the administration was vigorously pursuing the attackers at the Benghazi consulate. We'd identified 18 of them, but we weren't going to do anything about them because we didn't have enough evidence in a U.S. due process-style criminal prosecution to convict them beyond a reasonable doubt. That is, you tie that into closing Gitmo over a period of time. It's a statement that we're going to put all these people into federal court and act like they're just guys second-story men who pulled off a burglary. I think this is a conscious decision that will leave America more vulnerable, and I think the American people will see that. Unfortunately, it may take more tragedies to bring the point home.
We're talking to Ambassador John Bolton here on the Steve Malzberg Show. Before we continue here with the drone strikes and all, I do want to talk about the report that came out the other day that talked about the fact that we know exactly who did Benghazi. We know exactly where the mastermind is. We know exactly where he lives. We may have lost one or two of the perpetrators by now because it's been going on for so long. But the people on the ground there, talking to Fox News, unidentified, said that there's been no willingness to go get them, to arrest them, to kill them, to bring them to justice. None whatsoever. And all the time we're hearing from this president and this White House and this administration that we will bring them to justice. Don't you worry. We'll find out who did it. When in fact, apparently we know who did it, and we have no interest in bringing them to justice.
Yeah, exactly. I think this particular leak was in response to the criticism that the administration, after 8 months, had done effectively nothing to avenge the deaths of the 4 diplomats in Benghazi. And as they typically do, they leak information in order to defend themselves. But, of course, if you're a terrorist sitting at a cafe in Benghazi and you're now told that actually the administration does know where you are, how much longer do you think they're going to be there? I mean, this is like a notification that it's time to get out of Dodge and get into the tall grass, which is, I'm sure, what the terrorists are going to do. The fact is that as long as you treat international terrorism like it's something akin to a law violation in a constitutional civil society, you are giving the terrorists complete freedom of action. I think they understand that. I think this is the road to greater risks for Americans in the Middle East, or, sadly, as we saw in Boston, at home as well.
All right. Finally, the drone attacks yesterday. In a letter to Congress, Attorney General Holder confirming finally, officially, that the U.S. deliberately killed Anwar al-Awlaki, and that 3 other Americans also were killed in drone attacks, not necessarily targeted or not specifically targeted, it said in the letter. The president talking about shifting responsibility for drone attacks and also that they have to continue, but also saying that that they might not be as widely used. Your take on any kind of shift in policy?
Well, I'm glad that he's defended the use of the drones to date. I think that helps legitimize them beyond any question, including in the elimination of Americans who have turned and are turned against their country and are waging war against it. But to say, having declared victory, now to say we're going to limit our use of drones is, of course, consistent with the idea that what we really want to do is have federal prosecutors bring them into federal court. And it's pretty hard to give somebody due process if you've turned them into an oil spot. So the president here is really saying, that tactic, which formerly was a mark of their success in the war against terrorism, we're going to abandon. So you figure that out. This is a cause for celebration in terrorist camps all over the Middle East.
And now, today, sir, we find out that the M15 in London and England admit that they knew about the 2 terrorists who slaughtered the soldier yesterday. And this beheading stuff is getting a little too common. We know that now that the FBI killed a man who was in contact with and in fact knew the brothers who blew up the Boston Marathon, and they believe that he was complicit in a triple homicide up a couple of years ago on 9/11 in Boston, where again necks were severed, partially severed from the head. We see what happened in London, and we know that Daniel Pearl had his head chopped off, and it seems to me that it's becoming almost a trademark of sorts. And how do you feel about the fact that they knew who these guys were, but there they were walking the streets and able to do what they did?
Well, MI5 is going to have some explaining to do, but I think this incident in Florida where the FBI were questioning this individual in connection with the Tsarnaev brothers and ended up in self-defense having to shoot him tells you the nature of this threat. You know, it's not many FBI interrogations that end up in a shootout like this. And, you know, we can continue to treat this as law enforcement. We made this mistake in the 1990s. I'm afraid we're making it again today. And I'm very afraid that innocent Americans will pay the price for this administration's inability to see the reality right in front of them that international terrorism remains a grave threat.
All right, Mr. Ambassador, as always, we thank you for your time, sir. Take care.
Thanks again for having me.
My pleasure. Ambassador John Bolton. I think I said to him